There is a habit so simple yet so powerful that it can completely transform your life. It doesn't require hours. It doesn't demand perfection. It only asks for consistency. Many people are waiting for a breakthrough, praying occasionally, hoping something will change. But faith doesn't grow by accident. Faith is built day by day, moment by moment. What if just 15 minutes a day could reshape your thinking, strengthen your spirit, and position you for victory in every area of your life? This is not about religion. This is about relationship. This is about developing a daily connection so strong that fear loses its grip, doubt disappears, and faith becomes your natural response. Today, you are about to discover the 15-minute prayer habit that builds unstoppable faith. There is something profoundly transformative about showing up before God every single day, not occasionally, not when circumstances demand it, but with a steady, unwavering commitment that says, "This is part of who I am." Consistency is where faith stops being an idea and begins to take root as a living force within you. It is not the length of the prayer that builds power, but the regularity of it. When you dedicate just 15 minutes daily, you are establishing a divine pattern, one that trains your spirit to recognize God's presence as natural, accessible, and ever near. Many people wait until life shakes them before they pray, but a life built on consistent prayer is not reactive, it is proactive. In those quiet, repeated moments, something begins to shift internally. Your spirit becomes more sensitive, more alert, more aligned. What once felt difficult begins to feel natural. Doubts that once shouted loudly begin to lose their voice because you have created a habit of hearing something greater. Faith grows not in bursts, but in layers, line upon line, moment upon moment, prayer upon prayer. Consistency also disciplines the mind. The mind is restless, easily distracted, and often led by what it sees or feels. But when you commit to those 15 minutes daily, you are training your mind to come under the authority of your spirit. At first, it may wander. Thoughts may pull you in different directions. But as you persist, as you refuse to give in to distraction, your mind begins to quiet down. It learns that this is a sacred time, a set-apart moment where heaven meets earth in your life. There is also a compounding effect in consistent prayer that many overlook. Just like small deposits into a bank account grow over time, these daily moments accumulate spiritual strength. You may not feel a dramatic change after one day or even 1 week, but over time, you will notice a stability, a confidence, and a boldness that wasn't there before. Situations that once shook you will no longer have the same power because something within you has been fortified through daily connection with God. Consistency builds expectation. When you meet God regularly, you begin to expect His presence, His guidance, His peace. Prayer is no longer a ritual, it becomes a relationship. You start to recognize His voice more clearly, not because it suddenly became louder, but because you have tuned your spirit to hear it through repeated exposure. And in that place of expectation, faith thrives. Faith is not struggling to believe anymore. It becomes a natural response to a God you are continually encountering. Even when you don't feel like praying, consistency teaches you to move beyond feelings. Feelings are temporary and unreliable, but discipline anchors you. There will be days when the words don't flow easily, when distractions seem stronger than usual, but those are often the most important days to show up. Because every time you choose prayer over comfort, you are strengthening your spirit. You are declaring that your relationship with God is not based on convenience, but on commitment. And as this habit deepens, prayer begins to extend beyond those 15 minutes. It starts to influence your thoughts throughout the day. You become more aware of God in your decisions, in your conversations, in your reactions. The consistency of those dedicated moments creates a continuous connection that doesn't turn off when the time is up. It becomes a lifestyle, a way of living, a constant fellowship that fuels your faith and shapes your entire life. Faith does not appear suddenly, nor is it produced by wishful thinking or emotional intensity. It is built deliberately, intentionally, and spiritually through a process that God Himself established. That process is rooted in hearing and speaking His Word. When you give 15 minutes of your day to prayer, you are not just talking, You are engaging in a divine exchange where your spirit is fed, strengthened, and awakened by truth that is higher than natural reasoning. The Word of God carries life within it. It is not ordinary language, not mere text on a page, but living substance that has the ability to shape realities. When you hear it, when you meditate on it, when you speak it out of your mouth, something begins to happen deep within your spirit. Faith begins to rise, not as a fragile hope, but as a confident assurance. This is why speaking the Word during your prayer time is so powerful. It moves your focus away from problems and aligns your spirit with God's promises. Many people pray from a place of desperation, constantly repeating their problems, rehearsing their fears, and magnifying their struggles. But that kind of prayer does not build faith. It reinforces doubt. When you begin to speak the Word in your prayer time, you are shifting the atmosphere. Instead of declaring what is wrong, you begin declaring what God has said is right. Instead of focusing on what you lack, you begin to affirm what has already been provided. This shift is where faith starts to take root and grow stronger. There is a creative power released when you speak God's Word. Your words are not empty. They carry authority when they are aligned with divine truth. As you declare the promises of God during those 15 minutes, you are not trying to convince God to act. You are building your own faith to receive. Your spirit begins to agree with heaven, and that agreement produces confidence. It becomes easier to believe, easier to stand, easier to trust, because you have filled your heart with something greater than doubt. Hearing also plays a crucial role in this process. When you read the Word out loud or listen to it during your prayer time, you are feeding your spirit directly. Faith grows by hearing, and hearing repeatedly. One exposure is not enough. Just like the body needs daily nourishment, your spirit requires consistent intake of God's Word. As you hear it again and again, it begins to sink deeper, moving from your mind into your heart, where true faith is formed. Over time, the word you speak begins to shape your inner dialogue. You start to think differently. Fearful thoughts are replaced with confident ones. Negative expectations give way to hopeful anticipation. This transformation does not happen overnight, but through steady repetition. Every time you speak the Word during your prayer time, you are planting seeds. And those seeds, when nurtured consistently, produce a harvest of strong, unwavering faith. There is also a strengthening that comes from declaring the Word in the face of contrary circumstances. When everything around you suggests one outcome, but you choose to speak what God has said instead, you are exercising your faith. It may feel unnatural at first, even uncomfortable, but that resistance is part of the growth process. The more you do it, the stronger your faith becomes. You are training your spirit to rely on truth rather than appearances. As this habit develops, your prayer time becomes less about asking and more about affirming, declaring, and aligning. You begin to approach God not as someone unsure or hesitant, but as someone who knows His Word and stands on it. Your confidence grows, your prayers become more focused, and your faith becomes more resilient. You are no longer easily shaken, because your foundation is built on something unchanging, something eternal, something that cannot fail. Man is not just a physical being with a mind that thinks and a body that feels. At the core of his existence is the Spirit, the part that was designed to commune with God, to receive from Him, and to respond to Him. It is within this inner man that true faith is born and developed. The 15-minute prayer habit is not merely a mental exercise or a routine of spoken words. It is a deliberate investment into the development and strengthening of your spirit. Most people live dominated by their senses. They respond to what they see, what they hear, and what they feel. When circumstances are favorable, they feel confident. When challenges arise, they feel shaken. But faith does not operate in that realm. Faith is of the Spirit. It flows from a deeper place that is not moved by outward conditions. When you consistently spend time in prayer, you are shifting your center of awareness from the outward to the inward, from the natural to the spiritual. Your spirit has the capacity to grow, just as your body grows with proper nourishment. But unlike the body, the spirit is strengthened through spiritual activities, prayer, meditation on the Word, and communion with God. Those 15 minutes each day are like a concentrated dose of spiritual nourishment. Even if it seems small, it carries great impact when done consistently. Over time, your spirit becomes stronger, more stable, and more responsive to God's leading. One of the first signs of a developing spirit is increased sensitivity. You begin to perceive things you once overlooked. There is a quiet awareness that grows within you, a sense of direction that does not come from reasoning, but from knowing. This is not something that can be forced. It is cultivated through time spent in God's presence. As you continue in your daily prayer habit, your spirit becomes more attuned to that inner witness, and your faith begins to rest on something deeper than intellectual understanding. The mind often seeks evidence before it believes, but the spirit can believe even when there is no visible proof. This is why developing your spirit is essential for unstoppable faith. If your faith is based only on what your mind can comprehend, it will always be limited. But when your spirit is strong, it can grasp truths that go beyond logic. It can hold on to God's promises even when circumstances seem to contradict them. This is where true stability is found, not in changing situations, but in a spirit that is anchored in God. During those 15 minutes of prayer, there is also a refining process taking place. As you quiet yourself and focus on God, distractions begin to lose their grip. The noise of the outside world fades, and your spirit has the opportunity to come forward. At first, this may feel unfamiliar, even uncomfortable, because the mind is used to being in control. But as you persist, your spirit begins to take the lead. You become less reactive and more grounded, less anxious and more assured. A strong spirit also produces endurance. Challenges do not disappear simply because you pray, but your capacity to face them changes. When your spirit is developed, you are not easily overwhelmed. There is a resilience that comes from within, a quiet strength that refuses to give in to fear or doubt. This is not something that can be manufactured through positive thinking. It is the result of consistent spiritual growth through time spent with God. As your spirit grows stronger, your faith becomes more effortless. You are no longer striving to believe or struggling to hold on. Belief flows naturally because it is coming from a place that has been nurtured and strengthened daily. Your responses change, your perspective shifts, and your confidence deepens. What once felt like a battle becomes a steady walk, guided by a spirit that has learned to trust God fully, and continuously. Prayer is not merely a spontaneous act driven by emotion or circumstance. It is a discipline, a deliberate training of your inner life that shapes who you become over time. Just as the body is trained through repeated physical exercise, your inner man is trained through consistent, focused moments in the presence of God. The 15-minute prayer habit becomes a spiritual training ground where your thoughts, your desires, and your responses are brought into alignment with something higher than yourself. Discipline is often misunderstood as restriction, but in reality, it is what creates freedom. When you choose to set aside those 15 minutes every day, you are not limiting yourself, you are creating space for transformation. You are establishing a boundary that says your spiritual life matters, that your connection with God is not optional or secondary, but essential. And within that space, something begins to take shape. Your inner world, which may have once been scattered and reactive, starts to become ordered and intentional. The mind is one of the primary areas affected by this discipline. Left unchecked, the mind will wander endlessly, moving from one thought to another, often dominated by worry, fear, or distraction. But when you enter into consistent prayer, you are training your mind to focus. At first, it may resist. Thoughts may interrupt. Distractions may seem louder than ever. And it may feel like you are accomplishing very little. But each time you gently bring your attention back, each time you choose to stay present, you are strengthening your ability to concentrate and to direct your thoughts rather than being controlled by them. This discipline also reshapes your desires. What you consistently give your attention to begins to influence what you value. As you spend time in prayer daily, your heart begins to shift. Things that once seemed urgent may lose their importance, while things that truly matter begin to take priority. Your desires start to align more closely with God's will, not because you are forcing yourself, but because your inner life is being molded through repeated exposure to His presence. There is also a refining aspect to disciplined prayer. When you come before God regularly, you begin to see yourself more clearly. Areas of weakness, attitudes, and patterns that may have gone unnoticed start to come to the surface. This is not to condemn, but to transform. Prayer becomes a place where adjustment happens, where correction is received, and where growth takes place. It is a process that requires humility, but it produces strength. You begin to change from the inside out, not through external pressure, but through internal transformation. Consistency in prayer also builds spiritual endurance. Just as physical endurance is developed over time through repeated effort, spiritual endurance grows as you remain committed to your daily practice. There will be days when you feel energized and focused, and others when it feels difficult to engage. But discipline carries you through both. It teaches you to remain steady regardless of how you feel. And in that steadiness, your faith becomes more resilient, less dependent on emotional highs, and more rooted in commitment. Over time, this disciplined approach to prayer begins to influence every area of your life. Your reactions become more measured, your decisions more thoughtful, and your perspective more grounded. You are no longer easily swayed by external pressures because your inner life has been strengthened. There is a stability that comes from knowing that you have spent time being centered, aligned, and connected before stepping into the demands of the day. The 15-minute habit may seem small in the moment, but its impact is far-reaching. It is shaping your character, training your focus, refining your desires, and building a foundation that supports lasting faith. It is in these quiet, disciplined moments that your inner life is formed, strengthened, and prepared to stand firm regardless of what comes your way. There is a depth of transformation that only occurs in stillness, in those quiet, undistracted moments where your attention is no longer scattered across the demands of life, but gathered and directed toward God. The 15-minute prayer habit creates a space where this kind of focus becomes possible. It is not about noise, not about many words, but about intentional presence. Where your spirit is attentive, your heart is open, and your mind begins to settle into a posture of receiving. In a world filled with constant stimulation, silence can feel unfamiliar. Many are accustomed to activity, to movement, to filling every moment with something that occupies the mind. But true spiritual growth often happens in the absence of all that. When you step into those 15 minutes and choose to be still, you are stepping away from the external pressures that compete for your attention. You are creating an environment where your spirit can breathe, where it can connect without interruption, where it can become aware of what has been there all along but often overlooked. This focused time allows you to move beyond surface level interaction with God. It is easy to speak quickly, to rush through prayers, to say familiar words without engaging deeply. But when you intentionally slow down, when you remove distractions and give your full attention, your prayer becomes more than routine. It becomes real, personal, and alive. You begin to notice details you once missed. You become aware of impressions, thoughts, and insights that do not come from hurried moments, but from quiet attentiveness. There is also a cleansing effect that takes place in this kind of focused presence. The mind, often cluttered with concerns, plans, and worries, begins to clear. As you remain in that space, those thoughts lose their urgency. They may still come, but they no longer dominate. Your focus shifts, and with that shift comes peace, not a temporary relief, but a deeper sense of calm that settles within you. It is in this calmness that clarity begins to emerge, where confusion gives way to understanding, and anxiety is replaced with assurance. Quiet time with God also strengthens your ability to listen. Prayer is often seen as speaking, but there is an equally important aspect of hearing. When you remove distractions and become still, you position yourself to receive. This does not always come in dramatic ways. Often, it is a gentle knowing, a subtle direction, a quiet confidence about what to do or how to respond. These moments are easily missed in a hurried life, but in focused stillness, They become more recognizable. Your spirit learns to discern what is from God and what is not. This kind of time also deepens your relationship with God. Relationships are not built on rushed interactions, but on meaningful connection. When you consistently give focused attention, you are expressing value. You are showing that this relationship matters enough to be prioritized. And as with any relationship, the more time you invest, the deeper it becomes. What may have once felt distant or formal begins to feel close and personal. You become more aware of God's presence, not just during those 15 minutes, but throughout your day. There is also a strengthening that occurs in your inner life through this focused time. Distractions lose their power over you because you have trained yourself to step away from them. Your ability to concentrate improves, your thoughts become more ordered, and your spirit becomes more steady. This carries over into other areas of life, affecting how you work, how you relate to others, and how you handle challenges. You are no longer easily pulled in different directions because you have developed the ability to center yourself. As this habit continues, those 15 minutes begin to feel less like a discipline and more like a necessity. It becomes a place you return to, not out of obligation, but out of desire. A place where you are strengthened, renewed, and realigned. The transformation that takes place in those quiet, focused moments is not always immediately visible, but it is deeply real, shaping your thoughts, your faith, and your entire way of being from the inside out. Doubt and fear are among the greatest obstacles to strong, unwavering faith. They do not always come loudly or dramatically. Often they enter quietly, through thoughts, through circumstances, through repeated exposure to negative experiences. Left unchecked, they begin to shape how you see yourself, how you see your situation, and even how you perceive what is possible. But the 15-minute prayer habit becomes a powerful weapon against these forces, not by ignoring them, but by confronting and replacing them with something greater. Every day presents opportunities for doubt to grow. Situations may not change as quickly as you expect, answers may seem delayed, and challenges may appear larger than your ability to handle them. In those moments, the mind begins to question, to analyze, to imagine outcomes that are rooted in fear rather than faith. This is where consistent prayer becomes essential. It provides a daily reset, a moment where you step out of the cycle of doubt and into the reality of God's truth. When you enter into prayer consistently, you are not just seeking comfort. You are actively reshaping your inner response to fear. Instead of allowing fearful thoughts to dominate, you bring them into the presence of God. You acknowledge them, but you do not allow them to remain unchallenged. As you pray, as you speak truth, as you focus your attention on what God has said, rather than what you feel, those thoughts begin to lose their authority. They may still attempt to return, but they no longer have the same strength because you have learned how to respond to them. Fear often thrives in isolation and silence, growing stronger when left unaddressed. But prayer breaks that cycle. It brings everything into the light. What once seemed overwhelming begins to shrink when viewed in the context of God's power and faithfulness. You begin to see that many of the things you feared were rooted in assumptions, not reality. And even when real challenges exist, they no longer appear impossible, because your perspective has shifted from limitation to possibility. There is also a strengthening that comes from repetition. Facing fear once is not enough. It must be confronted consistently. Each day that you choose to pray, each day that you choose to stand on truth instead of giving in to doubt, you are building resistance. Just as the body develops immunity through repeated exposure, your spirit develops strength through repeated acts of faith. What once intimidated you begins to lose its influence because you have trained yourself to respond differently. The discipline of daily prayer also prevents fear from taking deep root. When you regularly bring your thoughts, concerns, and challenges before God, they are dealt with before they have the chance to grow. Instead of allowing worry to build over time, you release it daily. This keeps your inner life clear and prevents the accumulation of anxiety. It becomes a habit to address things immediately, to refuse to carry burdens longer than necessary. Doubt often questions what you cannot see, but prayer anchors you in what you know. It reminds you of what has been spoken, what has been promised, and what has already been done. As you spend those 15 minutes focusing on truth, your confidence begins to rise. Not because everything around you has changed, but because something within you has become more certain. That certainty becomes a shield, protecting your mind from being easily swayed by negative thoughts or uncertain circumstances. Over time, the presence of fear diminishes, not because challenges disappear, but because your response to them has been transformed. You are no longer controlled by what you feel or what you imagine might happen. Instead, you stand on a foundation that has been reinforced daily through prayer. There is a calmness that replaces anxiety, a confidence that replaces hesitation, and a steadiness that remains even in uncertain situations. This is the result of consistently choosing faith over fear, truth over doubt, and prayer over worry, allowing your inner life to be shaped by something far stronger than the pressures around you. What begins as a simple, intentional 15-minute prayer habit is never meant to remain confined to a specific time slot within your day. It is the starting point, the seed that, when nurtured consistently, grows into something much greater, a lifestyle where faith is not something you visit occasionally, but something you live in continuously. Those initial minutes are like opening a door, and once that door is opened daily, it becomes easier to remain aware of God's presence long after the time has passed. At first, the structure of 15 minutes is necessary. It provides focus, it establishes discipline, and it creates a foundation. But as you continue in it, something begins to expand. You start to carry what you experienced in those moments into the rest of your day. Thoughts of God become more frequent. A quiet awareness begins to follow you into your daily routines, into your work, your conversations, your decisions. Prayer is no longer something separate from life. It becomes woven into it. This transition happens gradually, almost unnoticed at first. You may find yourself pausing briefly during the day to reflect, to give thanks, or to seek guidance. These moments may only last a few seconds, but they are significant. They are evidence that your connection with God is no longer limited to a specific time. It is becoming continuous, a steady flow rather than an occasional act. And in that continuity, faith is strengthened in a way that cannot be achieved through isolated moments alone. A lifestyle of continuous faith also changes how you respond to situations in real time. Instead of waiting until later to pray about something, your first instinct becomes to turn inward immediately. Whether it is a challenge, a decision, or an unexpected moment, you are already connected. There is no need to shift gears or prepare yourself because you have been living in that awareness. Faith becomes your default response, not something you struggle to activate. There is also a deepening of trust that comes with this kind of lifestyle. When you are consistently aware of God's presence, you begin to rely on Him more naturally. You are not constantly questioning or second-guessing, because you have developed confidence through ongoing interaction. Decisions become clearer, not because every detail is revealed, but because you trust the guidance you are receiving. This trust is built over time, through repeated experiences of turning to God and finding that He is present and faithful. As the habit grows into a lifestyle, it also affects your identity. You no longer see yourself as someone trying to have faith. You begin to see yourself as someone who lives by faith. This shift is subtle but powerful. It changes how you think, how you speak, and how you act. Faith is no longer an effort. It becomes a natural expression of who you are. It influences your outlook, your expectations, and your interactions with the world around you. There is also a sense of stability that comes from continuous faith. Life is filled with changes, uncertainties, and unexpected events, but when your connection with God is ongoing, you are not easily shaken. You carry a sense of grounding with you, a quiet assurance that remains regardless of external circumstances. This does not mean that challenges disappear, but it means that you face them from a place of strength rather than instability. Over time, the distinction between your prayer time and the rest of your life begins to fade. The 15 minutes remain important, They are still a dedicated time of focus and renewal, but they are no longer the only point of connection. Instead, they serve as a foundation that supports a constant relationship, a continuous awareness, and an unbroken flow of faith that moves with you throughout every moment of your day. The power of this is not in complexity, but in simplicity. 15 minutes, set apart, protected, and given fully to God, can become the turning point of an entire life. Not because of the time itself, but because of what happens within that time. It is where consistency begins to shape you, where the Word starts to live in you, where your spirit is strengthened, where discipline forms your inner life, where quietness transforms your mind, where fear loses its grip, and where faith begins to flow beyond limits. You don't need hours to begin. You don't need perfect conditions. You don't need to feel ready. What you need is a decision to show up daily, regardless of how you feel, regardless of what you see, regardless of what tries to distract you. Because every time you step into those moments, something is happening, even if you cannot see it immediately. Strength is being built. Faith is being formed. Your inner life is being established on something unshakable. And as you continue day after day, those 15 minutes will no longer feel small. They will begin to overflow. What starts as a habit will become a hunger. What begins as discipline will become desire. What feels intentional at first will become natural. You will carry that awareness into every part of your life, into your thoughts, your words, your actions. Faith will no longer be something you try to activate. It will become the way you live. There will be days when it feels easy and days when it feels like a challenge. But the power is in staying consistent, because it is in that consistency that transformation takes place. Not overnight, not all at once, but steadily, deeply, and permanently. You are building something that cannot be shaken by circumstances, something that is not dependent on emotions, something that stands firm regardless of what comes your way. So begin where you are. Protect those 15 minutes. Treat them as sacred. Show up with sincerity, with expectation, with a willingness to grow. And as you do, you will discover that unstoppable faith is not something reserved for a few. It is something that is built day by day, moment by moment, in the quiet place where you meet with God consistently and wholeheartedly.